My children handed me a servant's uniform for their anniversary party. "It's what you're good at, Dad," my daughter said with a smirk. So I served their wealthy guests with perfect professionalism, my old skills honed to a razor's edge. But when my son mockingly invited me to give the toast, I smiled. They thought it was their final humiliation. They didn't know the performance was for them, and my speech was about to begin. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The uniform felt familiar, heavier than I remembered, perhaps, weighted down by the years and the invisible stain of my own children's contempt. As I fastened the polished buttons, my reflection in the gilded mirror of their guest room was a ghost from another lifetime. But this was not a costume of shame. To me, it was armor. It was the uniform of a profession I had not merely worked in, but mastered. It was the symbol of a life of discipline, discretion, and dignity. Values my children, in their frantic pursuit of status, had long since forgotten. They didn't understand. They never did. To Mark and Chloe, my life's work was a source of deep, burning embarrassment. In their world of venture capitalists, tech entrepreneurs, and inherited wealth, their father had been, to put it in their own cruel words, the help. They could never see the art, the strategy, the sheer psychological brilliance it took to manage a five-star grand hotel, a world unto itself. I wasn't just a butler. I was the general manager of the St. Alistair Grand for over 30 years, one of the most prestigious hotels on the continent. My job was not to serve plates, but to orchestrate perfection. I was the silent conductor of an impossibly complex symphony, ensuring that every note, from the thread count of the sheets to the temperature of the champagne, from the discretion of the staff to the security of a visiting head of state, was flawless. I remember a conversation with my late wife, Evelyn, years ago, after a particularly grueling week hosting a global economic summit. I had come home exhausted, the weight of the world's most powerful people on my shoulders. "Is it worth it, Robert?" she had asked, gently massaging the tension from my neck. "The long hours? The constant pressure? The anonymity?" I had looked at her, my beautiful Evelyn, the bedrock of my life. "My dear," I'd said, "anonymity is the hallmark of success in my profession. If a guest never has to think about how their comfort was achieved, it means I have done my job perfectly. We are the invisible architects of tranquility." She had smiled then, a smile of pure understanding and pride. She saw the artistry in my work. She knew that I was not just a manager. I was a guardian of a sacred trust, the trust that people placed in us to provide a sanctuary from the chaos of the world. It was a sanctuary we worked tirelessly to provide for our own children, Mark and Chloe. Every long night I spent at the hotel, every weekend I missed, every ounce of energy I poured into my career was for them. Evelyn and I were not born into wealth. We built our lives meticulously, saving every penny, investing wisely, all with a single goal, to give our children the opportunities we never had. We sent them to the best private schools, the most prestigious universities. We wanted them to have a life of comfort, a life where they would never have to know the quiet desperation of an unpaid bill or the gnawing uncertainty of the future. We succeeded, perhaps too well. The first sign of the rot came when Mark was a teenager. He was having friends over from his elite prep school, boys whose fathers had names that appeared in financial journals. I came home early that day, still, in my professional suit, and walked into the living room. "Mark," I said with a smile, "let me get you and your friends some refreshments." One of his friends, a boy with the casual arrogance of old money, looked at my uniform, the crisp black suit of a hotel manager, and asked, "Mark, your dad's a waiter?" I saw a flicker of panic in Mark's eyes, then a flash of something colder, shame. "No, of course not," he stammered, his face flushing red. He's in hotel investments. Just came from a meeting." I didn't say a word. I simply went to the kitchen, prepared a tray of drinks and snacks with the flawless presentation I was known for, served them, and retreated to my study. But I had heard it. The first lie. The first crack in the foundation of our family. He wasn't just lying to his friend. He was lying to himself, trying to erase the truth of where his privileged life had come from. That lie became their silent, shared narrative. As Mark and Chloe grew older, they constructed an elaborate fiction around my career. Hotel investments became their standard explanation. They never invited their society friends to our comfortable but modest home. They never spoke of my work, and if asked, they would change the subject with an awkward haste. Their shame became a wall between us, a wall built brick by brick with their own insecurities. They loved the fruits of my labor, the education, the financial stability, the connections my reputation afforded them. But they despised the tree from which it grew. They saw my profession not as a source of pride, but as a dirty secret that disqualified them from the elite circles they so desperately wanted to join. They failed to understand the ultimate lesson I had tried to teach them. That true class is not about what you own, but about how you carry yourself. It is about dignity, grace, and respecting the hard work of others, especially the work done in service to them. The wall of shame they built grew higher and thicker with each passing year. It was cemented by their choices, their friends, and the partners they brought into our family. Mark married a woman from a family of old money, a woman whose condescending smiles made my skin crawl. Chloe married a tech entrepreneur who once asked me in all seriousness if I could give him some tips on how to train his staff. They saw me not as a person but as a function, a set of skills to be utilized or dismissed. My greatest pain was watching how they treated Evelyn. She was the gentlest of souls, a woman who saw the good in everyone, and she could not comprehend the coldness that had crept into her own children's hearts. She would host family dinners, preparing all their favorite dishes, only to have them arrive late and leave early, checking their phones throughout the meal. "They're just busy, my dear," I would tell her, trying to shield her from the truth I saw so clearly. "They have important lives." "Are their lives more important than this, Robert?" she would ask, gesturing to the empty chairs around our table. "More important than family?" I had no answer for her. When Evelyn fell ill, the wall between us and our children became an unbreachable fortress. The diagnosis was sudden, cruel. My world, once a grand, bustling hotel, shrank to the quiet, sterile confines of a hospital room. I retired early, without a second thought, to become her full-time caregiver. My profession had taught me the art of anticipating needs, and I poured all of that skill, all of that love, into making her final years as comfortable and dignified as possible. Mark and Chloe's visits were brief, almost perfunctory. They would arrive with expensive flowers that seemed to mock the simplicity of the hospital room, their conversations filled with a hollow, practiced sympathy. "How is she, Dad?" Chloe would ask, though her eyes were already glancing at her watch. "She's having a difficult day," I would reply. "She would love it if you'd sit with her for a while." "Oh, I wish I could," she'd say, pulling out her phone. "But I have a conference call in 20 minutes I just can't miss. You understand?" No, I didn't understand. I didn't understand how a conference call could be more important than holding your mother's hand. I didn't understand how my son, Mark, could stand by his mother's bedside and discuss a golf trip he was planning. Their lives, which I had worked so hard to build, had become so full of their own self-importance that there was no room left for the woman who had given them life. During this time, I made a decision. For years, my profession had given me unique investment opportunities. I had access to a private portfolio managed by the very financial titans who frequented my hotel. It was a privilege I was afforded due to the immense trust I had built. Quietly, meticulously, I had grown our savings into a substantial fortune, a nest egg for my and Evelyn's golden years. Mark and Chloe knew nothing of this. They saw only my salary, my pension. They saw the modest house, the simple car. They had no idea about the hidden wealth because I never wanted them to. I wanted them to build their own lives, to find their own success. But seeing their callousness, their utter disregard for their dying mother, a cold fear gripped me. I realized that if I were to pass after Evelyn, they would treat my legacy with the same contempt they showed my profession. They would squander the fortune we had so carefully built on frivolous status symbols, erasing the story of our hard work. So I met with our lawyer. I established an anonymous trust, moving the vast majority of my assets into it. The trust was linked to the St. Alistair hotel chain, but my name was nowhere on the public documents. On paper, I was just Robert, the retired hotel manager with a modest pension and a paid-off house. In reality, I was a silent, significant shareholder in the very industry I had dedicated my life to. It was my insurance policy, a way to protect our legacy from the very children it was built for. The night before Evelyn passed, she was lucid for a few precious hours. She was frail, but her eyes were clear. She held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't let them take your dignity, Robert," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "Your service, it was an art form. It was a thing of pride. It was a noble profession. Don't you ever let them make you feel small for it." "Never." "My love," I promised, my tears falling onto our joined hands. "I will never forget." It was a promise that would soon be tested in the cruelest way imaginable. After Evelyn's passing, my children's behavior went from neglectful to predatory. They saw me not as a grieving father, but as a problem to be managed. They believed I was now alone, vulnerable, and most importantly, financially depleted after years of Evelyn's medical expenses. They assumed the man who had orchestrated flawless state dinners and managed the whims of billionaires was now a simple, broken old man, easy to manipulate. Their plan began to unfold with a series of concerned phone calls. "Dad, are you eating properly?" Chloe would ask, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You sound so tired." "I'm managing, sweetheart," I would reply, knowing full well she wasn't asking about my health but probing for weakness. Then came the suggestions. "No, Dad," Mark said during one of his rare visits. "This house is much too big for one person. The upkeep must be a nightmare. Have you considered downsizing? Moving into a nice, modern retirement community? We could handle the sale for you, make it easy." They saw my home, the sanctuary Evelyn and I had built, as nothing more than a liquid asset, a final inheritance to be cashed in. Their campaign was subtle at first, a slow, methodical attempt to undermine my confidence and my independence. They questioned my decisions, helped with my finances by asking for account numbers and passwords, and spoke to me in the slow, patronizing tone one uses with a child. This party, this lavish 10th anniversary celebration for Mark, was to be the centerpiece of their strategy. It was a public performance. The guest list was a carefully curated collection of their most influential friends and potential business partners, the very people they wanted to impress. Their plan, as I later pieced it together, was as cruel as it was simple. They would present me to this powerful audience as a charming but slightly dotty old man, a former servant who was now a gentle burden they were lovingly caring for. They would use the party to publicly establish a narrative of my decline, making it easier for them to later argue for a power of attorney, for control over my assets, specifically the house. The request for me to wear the uniform was the masterstroke of their plan. It was delivered by Chloe over the phone, her voice a perfect imitation of sweet reason. "Dad, we had an idea for the party," she began. "The catering staff is a little inexperienced, and we're so worried something might go wrong. It would be such a huge help, a huge favor to us if you could just oversee things. You're the best in the world at it. Maybe you could even wear your old uniform. It would be a fun, nostalgic touch." A fun, nostalgic touch. She made it sound like a tribute, an honor, but I heard the venom beneath the honey. She wanted to put me on display to put me in my place in front of her friends. She wanted to reduce my entire 30-year career, my legacy, to a party gag. This was the moment my promise to Evelyn echoed in my mind. Don't let them take your dignity. I knew I could refuse. I could hang up the phone, sever all ties, and live out my days in angry solitude. But that wasn't my way. I was not a man of scorched earth. Tactics. I was a strategist. A man who understood that the most effective way to defeat an opponent is to use their own arrogance against them. So I agreed. Of course, sweetheart, I said, my voice perfectly calm. If it will help you and Mark, I would be honored. There was a moment of surprised silence on her end, as if she couldn't believe her cruel gambit had been accepted so easily. Then, a triumphant giggle. Oh, thank you, Daddy. You're the best. This will make the party absolutely perfect. Oh, it would be perfect, I thought as I hung up the phone. But not in the way she imagined. I knew something they didn't. I knew that the guest of honor, the man they were most desperate to impress, was a reclusive private equity billionaire named Mr. Alistair Blackwood. I knew this because I had managed his private events at the St. Alistair for over a decade. But more importantly, I knew that Mr. Blackwood had, just 6 months ago, become the new anonymous majority owner of the entire St. Alistair hotel chain. And as a holder of significant vested shares from my years of service, that made him, in a very real sense, my business partner. They were about to ask their servant father to perform in front of his own boss. They were setting a stage for my humiliation, but they had no idea I had already rewritten the script. The night of the party arrived, a perfect, clear evening. The driveway of my son's ostentatious mansion was lined with luxury cars, their polished surfaces reflecting the glittering lights from the house. Inside, a string quartet was playing softly, and waiters in crisp uniforms moved through a crowd of beautifully dressed people. It was a scene of immense wealth and calculated elegance. I arrived not as a guest, but through the service entrance, as instructed. Mark met me in the kitchen, a space larger than my entire living room. He avoided my eyes. "Dad, thanks for doing this," he said, his voice a low, hurried murmur. He handed me the uniform. It was my own, the one I had kept preserved, in a garment bag for years. They had taken it from my closet without asking. "The head caterer knows you'll be assisting. Just float, keep an eye on things, make sure the wine glasses are never empty." I took the uniform without a word. I went to the small staff changing room and put it on. Each button I fastened felt like a piece of my old armor clicking into place. I looked at myself in the small, cracked mirror. The uniform still fit perfectly. I adjusted the tie, straightened the jacket, and took a deep, steadying breath. The man looking back at me was not a victim. He was Robert, former general manager of the St. Alistair Grand, and he was on duty. I walked out into the party and my training took over. My mind became a silent, efficient machine, absorbing every detail. I saw a woman at the edge of the crowd looking uncomfortable. I discreetly signaled a waiter to offer her a fresh drink. I noticed the music was a fraction too loud for easy conversation. A quiet word with the quartet leader corrected it. I moved through the space with an invisible grace, a ghost in the machine of their perfect evening. My children watched me from across the room, smug smiles on their faces. They would occasionally point me out to their friends, whispering. I could imagine the words, "That's my father. Sweet old man. Used to be in the hotel business, you know. He insisted on helping out tonight." They were weaving their narrative, laying the groundwork for their future plans. Let them, I thought. Let them enjoy their temporary victory. I saw Mr. Blackwood arrive. He was, as always, understated, a man whose immense power required no flashy displays. He moved with a quiet authority that made others gravitate towards him. My children, of course, descended upon him immediately, their charm turned up to its maximum setting. I kept my distance, content to observe from the shadows. For 2 hours, I performed my role flawlessly. I refilled champagne flutes, cleared away empty plates, and ensured the comfort of every guest, all while my heart felt like a block of ice in my chest. I watched my children laugh and preen, using this party, this house, this life that Evelyn and I had built for them, as a stage for their own vanity. The turning point, the moment I had been waiting for, arrived with the clinking of a glass. It was Mark, standing on the grand staircase, calling for everyone's attention. "Friends, family," he began, his voice filled with a practiced warmth. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us. It means the world to have you here in our home." He went on, thanking his wife, his business partners. It was a perfect speech, polished and insincere. And then he turned his attention to me. "And I'd like to give a special thank you to one person in particular," he said, a theatrical catch in his voice. He gestured towards me where I stood by the service door. "My father, Robert. Even in his retirement, he just can't stop being the ultimate professional. He insisted on helping us out tonight, making sure everything was perfect." "Thank you, Dad. Your support means everything." The crowd applauded politely. It was a masterstroke of public humiliation, disguised as a loving tribute. He had defined me, categorized me, and put me in my box in front of everyone. Chloe then stepped forward, a malicious glint in her eye. "In fact," she said, her voice bright and clear, "I think it would be wonderful if Dad said a few words. Maybe give the toast. Who better to toast our success than the man who taught us the value of good?" "Service?" The guests murmured in agreement. All eyes turned to me. Mark and Chloe were smiling, triumphant. This was it. This was their final move, forcing their servant father to publicly bless their superior lives. They expected me to be flustered, to stammer out a few awkward, grateful words, and then retreat back into the shadows. I felt a profound, almost transcendent calm settle over me. I looked at their smug, expectant faces. I looked at the crowd of powerful strangers. And then my eyes met Mr. Blackwood's across the room. I saw a flicker of curiosity in his gaze. I straightened my tie, walked slowly and deliberately towards the staircase, and took the microphone from my son's hand. "Thank you, Mark, Chloe," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying easily through the suddenly silent room. "I would be honored to give the toast." I looked out at the sea of faces, and then I began my speech. The speech they had invited. The speech they would never, ever forget. I stood on that staircase, the microphone cool and solid in my hand, and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. My children, Mark and Chloe, stood beside me, their smiles like masks of indulgent condescension. They expected a few fumbling, sentimental words from their dear old dad. They were about to receive a masterclass. "Thank you, my children, for this opportunity," I began, my voice calm and measured, carrying the quiet authority I had honed over 30 years of addressing staff and calming dignitaries. It has been some time since I last wore this uniform. It brings back a great many memories, and it reminds me of the fundamental principles of the profession to which I dedicated my life. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. The guests were leaning in, intrigued by my formal tone. Mark and Chloe exchanged a slightly confused glance. This wasn't the rambling, emotional speech they had anticipated. My daughter, Chloe, mentioned the value of good service, I continued, turning to smile at her. Her own smile faltered slightly. "It's a phrase people use often, but I wonder how many truly understand what it means. Service is not servitude. Servitude is born of necessity. True service, the kind I practiced, is born of pride. It is an art form, a complex and demanding discipline. It is the art of anticipating needs before they are spoken. It is the science of creating an environment of such seamless comfort that the mechanics of it are entirely invisible." I let my gaze sweep across the room, making eye contact with the guests. I wasn't speaking like a father. I was speaking like a professor, a CEO, a man in command of his subject. The smug amusement on my children's faces was slowly being replaced by a dawning unease. This was not going according to their plan. The foundation of this art, I went on, my voice resonating, with a passion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, is knowledge. A great manager, a great host, does not simply see a room full of people. He sees individuals, each with their own unique history, preferences, and needs. To truly serve someone, you must first take the time to truly know them. I turned my attention to a prominent local banker standing near the fireplace. "Mr. Albright," I said, my tone respectful but familiar. "It's a pleasure to see you again. I trust your wife, Sarah, has recovered well from her knee surgery. Please tell her I have located that rare first edition book on English gardens she was searching for. It is waiting for her at my home." Mr. Albright stared at me, utterly astonished. "Robert, is that you? My God, I didn't recognize you. Sarah is doing wonderfully, thank you for asking. And the book, how did you ever find it?" "It is my business to remember the things that are important to the people I respect, sir," I replied with a slight bow of my head. I then turned to another guest, a woman known for her philanthropic work. "Mrs. Davenport," I said warmly, "that shade of blue is magnificent on you. It reminds me of the hydrangeas at the Villa d'Este in Lake Como. I believe you and your husband celebrated your 25th anniversary there, did you not?" The woman's hand flew to her pearls, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Why, yes, we did. How on earth could you know that?" Before I could answer, I let my gaze fall upon the guest of honor, Mr. Alistair Blackwood. He had been watching me with a quiet, intense curiosity. The smirk had long since vanished from his face, replaced by an expression of sharp, analytical interest. "Of course," I said, my voice now taking on a more intimate, professional tone. "The most demanding challenges come with the most discerning guests. For example, a truly exceptional host would know that our guest of honor tonight, Mr. Blackwood, while a titan of industry, is a man of specific and particular tastes." Mark and Chloe froze. I had just seized control of the conversation, shifting the focus to the one man they desperately wanted to impress. They were no longer the hosts of the party. They were now merely spectators at my performance. I addressed Mr. Blackwood directly, my voice filled with the quiet confidence of one professional speaking to another. "Sir, I hope you will forgive my children's oversight. They are, of course, new to the art of hosting on this scale. They served you a 2010 Cabernet Sauvignon, an excellent choice for most. But a truly attentive host would know that your personal preference leans towards the bolder, more complex notes of a vintage Chateau Margaux, specifically the 1982 vintage, if memory serves." Mr. Blackwood's eyebrows shot up. A slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. He nodded slightly, a clear sign of affirmation. The entire room was captivated. The guests were no longer looking at a servant. They were looking at an expert, a man of uncanny knowledge and profound sophistication. But I was just getting started. "Furthermore," I said, my voice dropping slightly, "a host with a true dedication to their guests' well-being would have discreetly informed the kitchen staff of your mild allergy to shellfish, specifically crustaceans. They would have ensured that the delightful-looking shrimp canapes currently circulating the room were kept well away from your vicinity, and that a special platter of prosciutto-wrapped figs was prepared exclusively for you." I gestured to a waiter who, on a signal I had given him hours earlier, now emerged from the kitchen with that exact platter and presented it to Mr. Blackwood. A stunned silence fell over the room, punctuated only by the soft clinking of ice in glasses. Mr. Blackwood took a fig from the platter, a look of sheer, unadulterated respect on his face. He nodded at me, a gesture that was not from a guest to a servant, but from one master of his craft to another. Across the room, I could see the blood drain from my children's faces. Their perfect party, their meticulously planned performance of social superiority had been completely and utterly hijacked. They were no longer the stars of the show. They were props in mine. I let the moment hang in the air, allowing the full weight of what had just happened to settle upon the guests. They were all looking at me now, their expressions a mixture of awe, confusion, and dawning realization. The narrative my children had so carefully constructed, that of the sweet, slightly dotty old man, their gentle burden, had been shattered. In its place stood a man of formidable knowledge and quiet power. I turned my attention back to my children, who were standing frozen on the staircase, their faces pale masks of disbelief. "You see," I said, my voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room, "the art of service is built on a foundation of loyalty. Loyalty to one's craft, loyalty to one's standards, and most importantly, loyalty to the people you serve." I paused, then added, "and to the people who have placed their trust in you." My gaze shifted back to Mr. Blackwood. Which brings me to my final point. A great manager, a great host, must also be a loyal and prudent steward of the enterprise he represents. He must understand its value, protect its assets, and honor its legacy. I took a small step forward on the staircase, my posture no longer that of a deferential servant, but of a man about to make a significant announcement. "For 30 years, I said, my voice resonating with a lifetime of pride, I had the honor of serving as the general manager of the St. Alistair Grand. During that time, I not only served the guests, I served the institution itself. I invested in its future, both with my time and, as a part of my compensation package, with my own capital. I became a shareholder, a silent partner in the success we all worked so hard to build." A collective gasp went through the room. The whispers started, quiet at first, then growing in volume. "Shareholder? He owns part of the St. Alistair?" Mark and Chloe looked at each other, their faces a canvas of pure, uncomprehending horror. The floor was collapsing beneath their feet, and they didn't know why. I held up a hand for silence, and the room instantly obeyed. "Therefore," I said, delivering the final devastating blow with the calm precision of a surgeon, "it gives me, as one of the largest private shareholders in the Blackwood Hospitality Group, the parent company of the St. Alistair chain, immense pleasure to see that our new majority owner and CEO, Mr. Blackwood, is a man who so clearly understands and appreciates the values of quality, discretion, and impeccable service that define our brand." The room exploded. Not with applause, but with a cacophony of shocked murmurs, of frantic whispers, of heads turning from me to Mr. Blackwood, then to my children, who now looked like two terrified statues about to crumble into dust. The truth, in all its brutal, beautiful clarity, had finally been revealed. I was not their servant. I was not their burden. I was, in a very real sense, their host's partner. Mr. Blackwood stood up, a broad, genuine smile spreading across his face. He raised his glass. "Robert," he said, his powerful voice cutting through the noise, "that was, without a doubt, the most magnificent presentation I have ever witnessed." He turned to the stunned guests. "And for those of you who are unclear, let me confirm. Mr. Robert here is not just a legend in our industry. He is indeed a highly valued and significant business partner. His wisdom is something I have come to rely on. It seems his children, however, have not been availing themselves of that same privilege. The final public humiliation was complete. It was not delivered by me with anger, but by their own guest of honor with a calm, irrefutable statement of fact. I looked at my children. Their faces were a ruin of shame and terror. Their carefully constructed world had been demolished in the space of a 5-minute speech. They had tried to make me small, to fit me into a box of their own making. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I was the one who had built the box. and I knew exactly how to dismantle it. Mr. Blackwood's words hung in the air, not like a toast, but like a verdict. The party, which moments before had been a symphony of calculated elegance, devolved into a cacophony of chaotic whispers. The social fabric of the evening had been torn to shreds, and my children were left standing naked and exposed in the wreckage. Guests began to move, not towards the bar or the buffet, but towards Mr. Blackwood, and to my surprise, towards me. They bypassed Mark and Chloe as if they were invisible, their eyes now filled with a new, hungry curiosity. "Robert, my dear fellow, I had no idea," boomed Mr. Albright, the banker, clapping me on the shoulder. "A shareholder, you sly dog. We must have lunch next week. There are opportunities we should discuss." Mrs. Davenport, the philanthropist, looked at me with newfound respect. "Robert," she said, her voice low, "the way you handled that, it was a masterclass in grace under pressure. My foundation's annual gala is next month. I would be honored if you would be my guest." I was no longer the charming but dotty old man. I was a power player, a man with secrets, a man of substance. And my children, the supposed hosts, the centers of this universe they had created, were now nothing more than disgraced footnotes in my story. I watched them as they stood marooned on the staircase, the polite smiles of their guests turning to cold, dismissive glances. Their friends, the ones who had laughed at their cruel joke, now avoided their eyes, quickly making excuses and heading for the door. The party was over. The performance had ended, and the audience was walking out. On the actors, I saw Mark try to intercept a potential business partner, a man he had been courting for months. "John, wonderful to see you," he said, his voice strained, a desperate smile plastered on his face. John looked at him, then at me, then back at him. "Mark," he said, his tone icy, "I think I'll be in touch with your father's office from now on." He turned and walked away, leaving my son standing alone, his hand still outstretched. Chloe fared no better. She approached a group of women she considered her closest friends, the wives of powerful men. "Can you believe it?" she said with a brittle, forced laugh. "Dad and his little secrets!" The women offered her thin, pitying smiles. "It was quite a speech, Chloe," one of them said before they all made their excuses and melted into the departing crowd. In less than 10 minutes, the grand ballroom was nearly empty. The only ones left were the hired staff, who were now looking at me with a mixture of awe and professional solidarity, a few bewildered family members, and Mr. Blackwood, who was watching the entire scene unfold with the calm, analytical gaze of a chess master observing a beautifully executed checkmate, and of course Mark and Chloe. They finally descended the stairs, their faces a ruin of shattered pride and raw fury. They approached me, their movements stiff, robotic. The masks were gone. There was no more pretense, no more false sympathy. Only the ugly, unveiled truth of their resentment. "What have you done?" Chloe hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You humiliated us. You ruined everything." "I did nothing, Chloe," I replied, my voice quiet, calm. I had taken off the servant's jacket and folded it neatly over my arm. I was no longer in uniform. I simply told the truth. You, on the other hand, constructed an evening built on a lie. The truth is a powerful thing. It tends to demolish flimsy structures. "This was our party! Our friends!" Mark snarled, his face contorted. "You came into my home and you made a fool of us." "Your home?" I asked, a single eyebrow raised. I let my gaze travel around the opulent room, lingering on the expensive art, the custom furniture. "This is a beautiful house, Mark. It must have cost a fortune. I know my modest pension certainly couldn't have afforded it. I have often wondered how you managed it." The question, posed so innocently, struck him like a physical blow, because we both knew the answer. The down payment for this very house had come from a family loan he had requested from me years ago, a loan he had never made a single payment on. The very foundation of his superior life was built on the generosity of the man he had just tried to publicly humiliate. He had no answer. He could only stare at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. His arrogance, his greatest weapon, had been rendered useless in the face of a simple, quiet fact. He had tried to define me by my past profession, but I was about to define him by his character. I looked from Mark's speechless face to Chloe's, which was twisted in a mask of defiance and denial. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat, trying to regain some semblance of control. "With your little speech and your secret money. You've been planning this all along, lying to us, making us think you were just some pathetic old man." "Pathetic?" I repeated the word softly, letting it hang in the air between us. "Tell me, Chloe, is it pathetic to work for 50 years to provide a life for your family that you never had? Is it pathetic to send your children to the best schools, to pay for their weddings, to help them buy their first homes? Is it pathetic to give them every advantage, every opportunity, hoping that they would grow into people of substance and character?" I took a step closer, my voice never rising above a calm, conversational tone. But it was that very calmness that seemed to unnerve them the most. "No," I continued. "What is truly pathetic is to be given all of that and to still feel so insecure, so hollow inside that you must resort to humiliating the very person who gave it all to you, just to feel important in front of a room full of strangers." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, piercing through the armor of their arrogance and striking the soft, frightened insecurity underneath. "We didn't ask you to do any of that," Mark finally managed to say, his voice cracking. "We never asked for your sacrifices." "You're right," I said, and the simple agreement seemed to stun him into silence. "You never did. That was my mistake. A mistake Evelyn, your mother, warned me about for years. She saw this coming. She saw the entitlement taking root, the gratitude withering away. She knew that the greatest gift we could give you was not money, but the character to earn it for yourselves. I, in my love for you, failed to teach you that lesson. Tonight, consider this my final, long-overdue tuition payment." I placed the folded servant's jacket on their marble-topped hall table. It looked absurdly out of place, a simple object of honest labor amidst so much purchased opulence. "You wanted to put me in my place," I said, looking them both directly in the eye. "You wanted to define me by this uniform. You have succeeded, but not in the way you intended. You have reminded me of who I am. I am a man who believes in dignity. I am a man who believes in loyalty. And I am a man who believes that respect is not something you can buy or inherit. It is something you must earn." I turned to leave. I had said everything I needed to say. The rest was up to them. "Wait." Chloe's voice was a desperate cry. "Where are you going? You can't just walk away. What are we supposed to do?" The question, so filled with a child's helpless panic, was the saddest thing I had ever heard. For 40 years, they had always had me as their safety net. No matter how badly they failed, no matter what mistakes they made, they knew their pathetic old father would be there to clean up the mess. I turned back at the doorway, my silhouette framed by the cool night air. "I believe," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "The modern term for it is networking. You have a room full of your most influential friends and business contacts." "Oh, wait." I paused, feigning a moment of realization. "It seems they've all gone home. Then I suppose you will have to do what Evelyn and I did all those years ago. You will have to figure it out for yourselves." Before they could respond, Mr. Blackwood, who had been observing the entire exchange from a discreet distance, stepped forward. He addressed Mark and Chloe, his voice polite but with an underlying edge of steel. "Your father," he said, has just given you the most valuable piece of advice you will ever receive. I suggest you take it. As for the business opportunities you and I were discussing, Mark, consider that conversation permanently concluded. I only partner with people who understand the meaning of loyalty." He then turned to me. "Robert, my car is waiting. Will you allow me the honor of giving you a ride home?" It was the final, devastating blow. Not only had they lost their father's support, they had been publicly and professionally annihilated by the very man they had tried to impress. I simply nodded to Mr. Blackwood. I did not give my children one last look. As I walked out of that grand, cold house and into the quiet dignity of the night, I felt no triumph. I felt no anger. I felt only a profound sense of release. I had finally kept my promise to Evelyn. I had not let them take my dignity. And in doing so, I had finally given them the one thing they truly needed, the empty space where I used to be, a space they would now have to learn to fill on their own. The ride home with Mr. Blackwood was quiet. We didn't speak of my children or of the disastrous party. We spoke instead of the old days at the St. Alistair. We reminisced about challenging guests, about near catastrophes averted by quick thinking, about the silent, shared satisfaction of a perfectly executed event. It was a conversation between two professionals, two men who understood each other on a fundamental level. As he dropped me off at my modest, quiet home, he shook my hand. "Robert," he said, his gaze direct, "my offer stands. The Blackwood Group could benefit immensely from your wisdom. Not as a manager, but as a consultant, an advisor. Your own schedule, your own terms. Just consider it." I thanked him and walked into my house, the house that my children had deemed unworthy of their friends. It was silent, peaceful. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like mine again. I walked to my study and took out the old framed photograph of Evelyn. Her smile, so full of warmth and pride, seemed to reach out to me. "I kept my promise, my love," I whispered to her. "I did not let them take my dignity." The aftermath for Mark and Chloe was as swift as it was brutal. The story of the party, of the servant father who turned out to be a secret shareholder, became the stuff of legend in the city's elite circles. It was not the kind of story that earned them admiration. They became social pariahs. Business deals that had been all but certain suddenly fell through. Invitations to exclusive events stopped arriving. The powerful, influential world they had worshipped had turned its back on them, not because they were cruel, but because they had been foolish. They had committed the ultimate sin in that world. They had been publicly outplayed. Their financial world, built on a foundation of my support and the illusion of their own success, began to crumble. Without my backing, and with their reputations in tatters, the banks grew nervous. The loans were called in. They were forced to sell the mansion, the cars, the trappings of a life they had not earned. A few months after the party, they came to my door. They were different people. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed desperation. They were humbled, broken. They came to apologize, a rambling, incoherent plea for forgiveness, and inevitably for money. They had lost everything. They said they needed my help just one last time. I listened patiently. I did not feel anger, only a deep and profound sadness for these two strangers who were my children. When they had finished, I did not write them a check. I did not offer them a loan. Instead, I walked to my closet and took out the neatly folded servant's uniform. I placed it on the table between us. "You do not need my money," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You have never needed it. What you need is to build something of your own, something that you can be proud of, something that cannot be taken away from you." I looked at them, at their expensive, now slightly worn clothes, at their soft hands that had never known a day of real labor. Your mother and I started with nothing but the dignity of our own hard work. This uniform, it is not a symbol of shame. It is a symbol of that dignity. It represents a lifetime of service, of pride, of earning respect through skill and dedication. I pushed the uniform towards them. This is your inheritance, not my money, but the lesson it represents. Go out into the world and learn to serve something other than your own vanity. Learn to create value, not just consume it. Learn to build your own lives from the ground up. When you have done that, when you have something real to be proud of, then you can come back and talk to me as equals. They left with the uniform, their faces a mixture of confusion, shame, and perhaps, for the first time, a flicker of understanding. I do not know if I will ever see them again. Their future is their own to write. As for me, I called Mr. Blackwood the next day. I accepted his offer. My life has found a new purpose. I do not work in the grand hotels anymore. I work with the next generation of managers, of hosts, of service professionals. I teach them not just the mechanics of the trade, but the philosophy behind it. I teach them the lessons I learned over a lifetime. That service is an art, that dignity is a choice, and that true class has nothing to do with the size of your bank account and everything to do with the quality of your character. My life is quiet now, but it is rich. It is filled with the respect of my peers and the satisfaction of passing on a legacy. I have found my peace, not in the silence of retirement, but in the purpose of my work. I have finally become what Evelyn always saw in me, not just a manager, not just a father, but a teacher. And that is a title I will proudly wear for the rest of my days. If this story about the true meaning of dignity has inspired you, please show your support by liking this video and sharing it with others. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice, wisdom, and the quiet power of a life well lived. Thank you for watching.